Okay, so the bucket. So yesterday I said when you identified with ego as being who you are, you're in the bucket. You're isolated and alone, and you're in your bucket. And I said when you're willing to step out of the bucket, you're inviting other people to step out of their buckets. But what I didn't say to complete the picture is if you're unwilling to get out of your bucket, you're also encouraging other people to stay in their buckets. So there is no neutral zone. Okay, so just think about that, because a lot of the times we think, well, what I do doesn't really matter, right? Kind of in that holiday zone where you have no responsibility. Okay? So just be aware, if you're choosing to go with egoic thoughts and you're choosing to be unhappy, you're encouraging other people to stay unhappy and to continue to be attached to their egoic thoughts. So as you might have noticed, when you're willing to be happy, it's infectious. It pulls on other people to be happy. So really, all I did this morning is I gave you all an opportunity to be happy. Isn't that really all I did? I allowed myself to be happy, and I invited you to be happy. And then you joined me. Why? Not because it was a thinking process. It's because it was a heart process. It was like, I know that in me. I want that. You know? And maybe some of you struggled a little bit. But you see, you couldn't maintain that struggle. You couldn't maintain the resistance because in you just wanted to be happy. You couldn't stand it anymore. So you just said you... And then it's... Isn't that true? Yeah. And also I asked you to keep your eyes open. And the reason I did that is because I wanted you to not just go internally. Okay? When you have your eyes open, and from the very moment in the warm-up, people were happy. You could feel it, right? Just your feet feeling on the ground, recognizing, engaging, being engaged. Okay, sometimes when we're engaged, it's overwhelming because we feel without our bucket, without our shell. So you get to a point, you know, you're kind of okay with the happiness, kind of okay with a little bit of ecstasy, and then it starts to be too much. And you go, right? I just got to tone it down a little bit. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to be a little more spiritual right now. Isn't that what we do? So that's why I kept saying, keep your eyes open, keep your eyes open. You know? And when you kept your eyes open, everything was just disappearing, right? And all there was happiness. Okay, so just recognize that. So, to prove my point, I love doing stuff like this. Okay. To prove my point that everybody is waiting to be happy, I'm going to play you a song. And this song was #1 in the United States, the UK, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, and 19 other countries. It was the best-selling song of 2014 in the United States with 6.45 million copies sold, as well as the United Kingdom with 1.5 copies sold. It reached #1 in the UK on a record-setting 3 separate occasions, and it became the most downloadable song of all time. It is the 8th highest-selling single of all time. Okay. You might have heard about it. That's the point. Okay, now, how could it be that popular if it didn't touch people, right? Okay, so I want all of you to stand up. I hope we hear it. Let yourselves go.
Find the book.
I'm happy. Oh.
Don't you think that's infectious? Doesn't that feel much better than being unhappy? Cool. Okay, let's go. Catch our breath. So, now we go back to talking about ego. Okay? So, you got to really see what ego is. It's basically the insistence of unhappiness. That's another way to look at it. Okay? Can you feel how happy, even just in this room right now, happy was even almost too small of a word. It was more like ecstatic, right? Because there was nothing rigid or static going on in this room. And ego is very rigid. It's very static. It's very known. Okay? So, do we have the courage to be that happiness in our own lives?
Yes.
Okay. So then we also have the courage to invite others by being happy, right? We have that courage, we have that capacity. Just by being ourselves, by allowing ourselves to smile. So if you walk around and you just notice yourself, you know, you're in the bucket. It's very simple. You're in the bucket and you're inviting other people to be in the bucket. If you allow yourself to smile and be yourself, there's a light that starts coming from you. It's a light that reaches out. It's a light that pulls on other people. You see, in somebody, I think Philippe was talking about being in a project that's planting seeds. So that's how we plant seeds. We be ourselves, our true selves. We allow ourselves to be happy. We allow ourselves to respond. Now, in order to do that, we also have to recognize the habits in ourselves that hold us back. So right now it almost feels really weird to even be talking about that which is holding anything back, because there's nothing being held back. But you see, we can talk about these things without being heavy, and we can talk about ego without making it a problem. We can talk about ego from this place of pure happiness, and it's actually the only place that you can really look at it from. Because then you're very interested and curious, like, oh, how does it all work? If you're not looking at it from this place, this deeper dimension of yourself that's always already happy, you see, then you make it into your personal problem, your personal project that you have to get over. and then someday you'll be happy. But these statistics show that a lot of people out there are just waiting for a little poke. Isn't that amazing? If you just think about it, you see, the world is not hopeless. A lot of the time we take this position, we take this separate position of all those unhappy people out there that are keeping us from being happy. But why don't we take the position of being that happiness ourselves and not worrying about the other people doing something to us, but caring for the other people by our own willingness to be happy. So that's what real care is. Do you care enough to transcend your own egoic habits? Do you care enough? Do you care enough to let the ego that you identify with burn? So all of you have been challenged this week, right? Everybody. And if you let the ego burn, as you've been doing, look what happens. Bookcases start to fall down. But sometimes, you just got to keep being happy even if the bookcase fell down. Let's say it did fall down. Should we all stop and make a problem? Or it's just a bookcase fell down. What's the big deal? Nobody died.
Even though somebody dies, it's not a problem.
Nothing's a problem, but it is a bit more of a responsibility if somebody dies. So we don't want to flatline. Okay, so we're just going to do a little review today about what we talked about yesterday. So basically, ego is anti-happiness. That seems to be pretty clear to everyone, right? The ego basically is, very simply, the personalization of thought and feeling. That's what it is. That action of personalizing thought and feeling is your activity. Nobody's making you do that. It's your activity. Now the liberating part about that is your freedom is not dependent upon anybody else. It's your activity, how you relate to thought and feeling that's arising. Okay? So also we talked about yesterday how the personalization of thought and feeling, we touched upon it, we're going to go a little deeper into it now, that the personalization of thought and feeling creates ideas, beliefs, and images about ourselves. Right? So we personalize a thought. The thought basically is, I have nothing important to say. That arises. You personalize that thought. You start to create an image that I'm not very smart, I'm not very creative, I'm inferior, and I'm worthless. So you create those images almost instantaneously. And if you do it over and over again, that image starts to feel like it's crystallizing. It starts to even feel stronger that this is who I am. I'm inferior, I'm unworthy, I'm worthless. Okay? So you just got to see how that works. The ego, in order to survive, because we've been talking about it, ego is never real, because ego is the insistence on separation and limitation. And if you go deeply into the spiritual truth, which I think everybody has touched into, you're recognizing that the separate self, the insistence of separation, is actually not true. And how are you recognizing that? Because the separate I that you believed yourself to be disappears in the light of consciousness when you let go. Isn't that true? Okay, so then you go, then if that's true in your own experience, then you can see that separation is not real. If it was real, it would still stay there. In the light of consciousness, if it was real, the ego would be sitting right there with you. Okay? So you always have to recognize that the separate self, it's always the illusion of the separate self. Because sometimes we can talk about the separate self and then we make it into something real again. Okay, it's never real. It's the illusion that it's real that causes you all your suffering. Okay? So that separate I, when you personalize thought and you create a self-image of who you are, then you have something to protect, you have something to prove, and you have something constantly to maintain. Okay, so we touched upon this yesterday also. It takes a lot of energy to keep something that's not real, to try to convince yourself that it's real. Okay? So you just got to really see this for yourself. So an exercise that you can do over lunch is just make a list of all your different self-images. Just think about it and go, wow, what are my self-images? Okay, and you might find that you have contradictory self-images. You might have a self-image that, I'm really beautiful. And then you also have a self-image, oh, I'm so ugly. Or I'm really smart. And then you have another belief that I'm really stupid. You might have different images for different people in your life. You have a certain image for your partner, your lover. You have another image for your mother and your father. You have a different image for friends. You might have different images if you have a group of friends. You might have an image for that friend you're upholding and another one for this one, another one for that one. You have a different image for your boss at work. You have a different image for your colleagues. So you start to kind of look at this, and it gets a little bit exhausting just looking at the list of all the images that you're trying to maintain all the time. And even when you're by yourself, and none of those people are there, you're still trying to maintain an image. So I just want you to really understand, this is exhausting. So just imagine your boss, your mother, your partner, your friends, all your friends, they all come and they're all in the room at the same time. You know, and you're like, oh shit. What am I going to do now? I don't even know how to be. Okay? You see, that's the moment of liberation. Because you're like, I don't know how to be. So when you let go of all these images, and sometimes you're forced to, if let's say they all showed up at the same time, you might just want to have a party for all the people that you know, and bring them all together and see what happens. But you see, that's the moment of liberation, because that's the moment the question comes up. It's like, I don't know who I am. You see, and when you don't know who you are, there's no limitation. Everything is possible. There's just ecstasy and happiness, and that can be experienced as quietness, contentment. It can be experienced in a lot of different ways. So you never know what life is going to be in every moment. You know, like 15, 20 minutes ago, I was running around like crazy. I was trying to figure out what I was going to say. I was trying to print stuff. I'm trying to find this song. I still needed to take a shower. I hadn't had breakfast, you know, and I'm like, ugh, you know, but I was happy. But it was a completely different experience than being here right now. You see, so all sorts of stuff can happen, but you don't have to move away from that contentment and that deep happiness of who you are. So if you don't know who you are, you're free. So understanding ego is basically the work that we all need to do in order to take away that which is covering the light of who we are. Okay? So, you know, if you kind of picture, if I put this bucket on my head, see, you're covering the light of who you are. When you have that bucket on your head, when you take it off, what happens? It shines. Not because you made it shine, is because you stopped trying to suppress it with all your ideas and all your self-images. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're going to look at the chart. We have it in Portuguese and we have it in English. I will be looking at the English side. Okay, so outer circle is basically talking about the positioning ego. And so these are the self-images that I was just speaking about. So the ego, in order to maintain the ego, it doesn't really matter what your image is. It just matters that you have one. So it doesn't matter if it's a good one or a bad one. It just matters you have one. And it's better if you have many. Okay? So you're taking a position. So we just have on the outer circle, we have a few different things. So ego, in order to maintain the illusion that it's real, needs to either be inferior or superior. Doubt. So when you start going deeply into who you are, and maybe some of you have already experienced this, you know, you've had a recognition of who you are, and then you start to hear the voice of ego, and you start to feel like you're losing it. And then you might even start to doubt that what you understood was true. Okay? And this can happen very, very easily. You know, right now we're in a retreat setting, and you go back into the world, and let's say you go back into your regular everyday life and something happens, and it knocks you a little bit off balance. You see, you can very easily, the movement to say, I've lost it, that's doubt. Because I think all of you are understanding that who you are is always who you are, even if you don't feel good. Okay? So if you move away from that, then you're doubting. So that's why we wanted to take the time for all of you to really go into, like, what is my deepest understanding? Because that is your reference point of what's true. So if you move away from that, you're doubting it. Okay? But don't make a problem out of it, because you can always come back. Okay, cynicism. Okay, the voice of ego will always want to whisper into your ear, it's not possible. Freedom is not possible. And even worse, it's saying, it's not possible for you. Okay? Now, this is maybe not something that you recognize in your experience. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I can tell you, I didn't consciously recognize it in my experience. And then one day, I heard this voice. And it was quite shocking to think that that's actually a belief that was going on in there. I had no idea about. But it came forward, and I recognized it for what it was, so it wasn't a problem. So you always have to leave a lot of space, that maybe there's a lot of stuff that's kind of floating around there, and then it pops into your awareness. Okay, but now when it pops into your awareness, hopefully you'll recognize it as just the voice of ego and not personalize it. Okay, we tend to be very attached to our beliefs and attached to our opinions, because that's the ego characteristic is always the one that needs to know. The need to be right. Anybody know that one? Okay. You see, because if you're attached to your beliefs and your opinions, you see, you're holding yourself separate. Because if someone else has a different belief or a different opinion, and you just hold on to yours with no receptivity of what the other person is saying, you see, you're imposing a separation right there. And when we do that, anytime we impose separation, we're basically, we're stopping something. We're stopping something else that could be possible in that moment. So it's not kind of a benign thing. It's not just a neutral thing when you take a position of separation. Because when you do that, you're actually stopping something else that could be emerging within you, within the other, or between the collective. Okay? So just like you just take a few minutes ago when everybody was dancing, or even this morning, you see, when nobody holds back, something starts to explode, and nobody's really thinking about themselves. You're just in the moment, right? So when people talk about being in the moment from an egoic place, most of the time people are like, I'm trying to be in the moment. I am going to be in the moment. But the I they're talking about is ego. And the ego can't be in the moment because the ego is always completely distracted and engaged with all of its images and all of the stuff it needs to do in order to maintain itself. So like you all experience, when you just let go of that, you're present. And you're not even thinking I'm present because you're just present. You're not trying to be present because you're already present. Do you see what I mean? Okay. So it's the identification with the psychological and cultural concepts. It's emotional identification and the pain body. If you look down at the bottom, narcissism. It's basically what I was representing with the mirrors, constantly needing a reflection of oneself and constantly thinking that you are the center of the universe and you are the only one that actually exists. And everyone else and everything else is here to serve you. Now probably you go, well, that's not what I do. But if you look a little deeper, you might recognize that's really what's going on. Okay? Just look sometimes. It'll, you know, if you're in the right place and you're not making a problem, it will just crack you up. Because you recognize you're just walking along and you think everybody is looking at you. Have you ever had that experience? Doesn't that kind of tell you that you think you're the center of the universe and everyone is looking at me? Okay, so these are things we kind of want to demystify because you can easily think, oh, I don't do that. But then you look, and that's the relationship you're having a lot of the time. You know, and that's also the movement to prove. So it could be like, what happens here sometimes is people come as volunteers, you know, so they're feeling a little insecure just because they're here. But then it's time to do a job, you know, or they're working or something. And then maybe they're working, but they're also looking around to make sure everybody knows that they're working and they're not being lazy. They're doing a good job. They're looking around going, is anybody noticing I'm doing a good job? Right? So that's that kind of stuff. Okay. So, in the other circle, these are just a few characteristics of ego to kind of try to highlight things for you, and these are not the only ones, just so you know. So greed. So if you think about just the spiritual seeker, and you have a spiritual experience, and instead of being interested to live that experience, you're more interested in having another experience. It's like saying, God, give me an experience, and God gives you an experience, and you go, give me more. Okay? And it's the need to have. Greed is just the need to have things. You know, you have 5 pairs of shoes, and you just want 22 pairs of shoes, or whatever it is. It's this constant need of wanting things. It doesn't have to just be things, it can also be experiences. So attachment, I think everybody's pretty clear on that. And the biggest attachment is the personalization to thought and feeling, the attachment to your self-images, and the attachment to what you think is your story and what you think is your life. Okay, so that's, and if you're attached to something, just think about it. If I have something that I'm attached to, then what am I going to do? I'm going to protect it. And who am I going to protect it from? All of you. You see, and then there's a separation again. But if I'm not attached to it, a thing, or an idea about myself, again, I'm just free and I'm not imposing any separation. Is this making sense? Okay. Okay, jealousy, lust. So the arising of jealousy, the arising of any of these, it doesn't mean that you have to personalize it. So if a jealous thought arises, then it doesn't mean that I am jealous. It just means a jealous thought arose. But if you personalize the thought, and then you think, oh, I'm jealous, then you have something again to be ashamed of, because you don't want anybody to know you're jealous, right? Because that's not cool. But also, most of the time, if you're jealous of someone And let's say that you have your partner and you're jealous of someone else, a man or a woman that's flirting with your partner, or your partner hopefully is not, but flirting with them. And there can be some jealousy, right? But then what are we going to do with that? Because if something happens and you feel that, you want to look and say, well, is this actually really true? Or is this all in my head? And then you can always go to the person and ask them and say, hey, look, I just saw this. What do you think about that? Instead of going into some kind of jealous rage or accusations or, and then if you've ever done that, so if anybody's ever done that, you see it's very undignifying. A lot of the time when we act out of egoic habits, it's just very undignifying. And then what happens? We feel undignified, and then we make that into a problem, and we just spiral down even further. Okay? So sometimes what happens is you might notice that, let's say you do something, let's say you're jealous, and you act out of it. And then you actually see that you did that, and you go to the person, and you apologize. Okay, so that's all you can do. You cleaned up your karma. But in the next moment, another thought arises that says you shouldn't have been jealous in the first place. So basically what that is the ego knocks the first time. Hello, hello, hello. Jealous thought coming in. Jealous thought coming in. And then you take it, and it's like, oh, thank God they took that one. Okay, but then you transcend that by apologizing, and then it's like, ego knocks again and says, didn't do it fast enough, didn't do it right. Okay, so you got to kind of look, the ego's always going to be knocking on your door, and you have the responsibility to not open the door. Okay? But just recognize that the ego just doesn't knock once, or twice, or 3 times. It's like sometimes outside the door knocking on all the walls, all at the same time. Okay, but you know that you just stay in the pot. You just stay in the house and do what you do. You don't have to answer the door. You don't have to make a problem, right? You're just in the house reading a book. It's all fine. Okay. Okay, something is wrong. So that's the same thing as making a problem, right? Something is wrong. Now, we're constantly, from an egoic point of view, something is always wrong. Okay, now if you think about why is that true? Because if you just think, if you don't exist, and you're not getting the affirmation that you need, you've got to make a problem. You've got to make something wrong in order to exist. If you think about it. So you've got to make something missing. So if you just think about it, I mean, does it make sense? Mm-hmm. It's kind of one of those things you got to reach for, because if there's no problem, do you exist as a separate self? If there's no ego, if there's nothing missing, do you exist as a separate self? No. So something always has to be wrong from an egoic point of view. Always. Haven't you ever noticed that you live kind of from a place that there's always a problem?
There's always a void.
Hmm?
There is always a void.
Yeah. There's always a void where you're thinking something's missing.
Yeah.
There was one time I was in this paint shop in Boston, and I was just standing there. There's nobody there. It was just me and the paint. And I'm just standing there with the paint. And I just realized, oh God, there's so many problems. And I just watched the problems just explode out of my head of everything that was wrong. And nothing was going on. I was just standing there with a bunch of paint. And I was just like, wow, look at that. So sometimes just look at really look at your own experience, because you see, the ego cannot hide if you're interested. So with your own curiosity, from a perspective of enlightened consciousness, be curious, and then you're going to see all sorts of stuff. But from that perspective, you'll be able to look, and you'll be able to see that's how the ego works. And you'll recognize it in yourself, And then you'll be able to recognize it in other people. And instead of blaming and shaming them, you'll just recognize they're just lost in the same thing that I was lost in. But now I'm just going to be happy and invite them to be happy through your own being of not making a problem. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, victimization. So, victimization, the definition of victimization is I don't have a choice. It basically means somebody is doing something to me. So inherent in thinking somebody or something is doing something to me, there's already another, which is already screaming separation. Right? Because there's another doing something to me. It's also, I can't do anything about it. So if you think about it from the perspective of maintaining the illusion of ego, victimization is a fantastic way to do it. Right? If you think about it, because it's like, when you're victimized, don't you feel helpless? And when you feel helpless, don't you feel isolated and alone? And if you're identified with being isolated and alone, the ego's back there going, ha ha ha, I can relax. They're completely lost in their isolation and their aloneness. Okay? But when you start stepping out, you're going to start recognizing maybe how victimized you have been in relationship to your own mind, in relationship to other people, in relationship to the government in the country you live in relationship to everything. So just look at it, in relationship to your computer. Right? I mean, look how fast that was. In relationship to traffic. I mean, nobody can really figure out why a traffic jam actually happens. You know, you're sitting there going, and then you sit in traffic forever, right? And then all of a sudden you just start moving. And you're like, why? What happened here? Right? And so then you look and you go, was this traffic jam an illusion or what actually happened? I don't really get it. So anyway, just kind of start to think about these things, okay? Okay, inertia. Inertia is just that heavy weight, meaning I'm not going to do anything today. I don't feel like being free. I'm just going to stay half dead and unhappy because I'm a little tired. And I don't really care. Okay, enough said? Okay, envy means you want something that somebody else has because you think something is missing and you want what they have. So how does this show up a lot of the time? It shows up for women very strongly, but it might be for men too, is that that woman is more beautiful than I am. And then you think you're lesser. And then the beautiful woman is probably thinking that you have something that she doesn't have. So it's always wanting something from the other that you think is missing within you. Okay? Shame. So also we don't have up here, but guilt. Guilt and shame kind of go together. So guilt and shame are kind of an example of the ego knocking on the door again. Okay? So you do something, right? And you find out I did something egoic, I caused suffering to someone else. And then you start to feel guilty, right? Or you start to feel ashamed. So normally what happens in that moment is when you start to feel guilty and ashamed, and you personalize that guilt and that shame, then you are more concerned about your self-image of being a nice person than you are in actually apologizing, taking responsibility for what you've done. If you take responsibility for what you've done, you see you're free in that moment from ego. But if you go with guilt and shame, you're more worried about yourself, your separate self. You're more worried about how you feel in that moment than actually caring for the person that actually received whatever it is that you did. So I'll give you a story because this really highlights it. I was at a teaching. I heard a teacher giving a teaching. I actually just heard the recording. and it was a Vietnam veteran who was speaking in an open dialogue, and he was talking about how he was in Vietnam and he killed children, and he was saying, you know, my whole life has been just destroyed because I killed the children, and I feel so guilty, and I feel so much shame, and I feel this and I feel that, and I experience this and I experience that, and my life is horrible because of this, and you know, and he kind of went on for a while. And then the teacher basically says, well, why don't you go to Vietnam and help orphans and put your attention on what you can do instead of yourself on how bad you feel. You see? So when we feel guilt and shame, what are we concerned about? How we feel. How we feel. We don't really care about what we did in the end. So guilt and shame are just a waste of time. I mean, all of these are a waste of time, but you know, I mean, really. But guilt and shame, especially if you're from a Catholic country, I mean, come on, it's built on that, right? So anyway, so again, just see it as the ego knocking, and knocking again, and knocking again, and also be careful, because if you feel guilty and you personalize that over and over again, you see, you can internalize and have a very strong image, very, very strong self-image, that you are just a shameful and guilty person. It's just inherent who you think you are. So just recognize that.
So when we feel it, it's just to feel the heat of that and don't touch it.
Yeah, well, you just, let's say that you do something. Guilt is actually a pull, a movement of ego. Conscience is something different. So let's say that you've done something that's caused harm to another person, okay? In that moment, you recognize, oh, that's true. I caused harm to someone else. So then, in the next moment, you have another opportunity of what you're going to do with that information. And maybe you're going to start feeling guilty because you've personalized it. You've taken an egoic position, and you've personalized it, and then you're more concerned about yourself in that moment. But maybe when you recognize you've done something to someone else, that you actually feel conscience, and you say, I want to clean this up. I want to take care of it. So you don't necessarily are just going to do nothing with it, but you want to find out, you want to be clean about what you want to do with it. Because sometimes we need to take action. Sometimes we need to look and say, oh, is this true? But we're coming from a place of questioning. That's the whole point. Because we want to know what's true, because we want to be free from that which is untrue.
So we can take action, or we just want to see and question and make it clear.
Right, but if it's clear to you what's happened, and out of that clarity is a demand for action, then you need to do that. Okay? Because it's not just about seeing things. A lot of times people can see stuff, but are they going to actually respond to it? And that actually brings up, if you go around a little bit more, pride. Because a lot of the time, just in the questions that Marta's asking, a lot of times you can see that you've taken a position. You see that you've projected onto someone your own fear, right? You see that you've done it. But maybe let's just say that the other person isn't quite aware of it. They don't really know that they've been manipulated. So you're like, well, they don't really notice. So I don't really have to say anything. See, that's the pride of the ego, just saying, no, I will not. I will not give. But if you recognize that something's happened, and you recognize, let's say you're in an argument, and you realize that the person you're talking to or arguing with is actually right. In that moment, are you going to act, and you recognize they're right? In that moment, are you going to maintain your position even though you know it's wrong? That's pride. Or you're going to just go, you're right. You see, and in that moment, the pride is broken. Mm-hmm.
And what if there is no possibility to make it up, to say I'm sorry? Like, my mother passed away, I could have chosen to come earlier,
Mm-hmm.
to hold her hand,
Mm-hmm.
and I have not chosen to do that.
You had what?
I did not choose
to do that. Okay.
So I came for the funeral,
Uh-huh.
But I could have, but I was afraid it was taking too long, or maybe I did not want to be there when she died. I don't know.
Right. Okay,
Anyhow, I cannot say, Mom, I'm sorry.
no, but you can.
Yeah.
You can, that's the beauty. So just because someone has left the body doesn't mean that the relationship is not there anymore. The body is not there anymore. Okay? But you're still you, and you can still release that, and you can still speak to your mother as if she's still here in the physical body. Okay? Because you can release that, because I'm sure your mother doesn't want you to carry that with you. Okay? So maybe tomorrow when we do the offerings, or unless you want to do it sooner, just sit down and speak to your mother.
I was planning to do that when I go back to the village
Okay.
where her body is.
Well, if you want, but you also can do it both times, because obviously it's something that's kind of, I don't want to say, it's something that's with you, right? So you don't have to hold on to it for another second. Okay? Because it's not like you're stuck with that guilt. That's what the offerings are all about. If you even recognize and you look and you say, well, I wish I actually would have gone now. You see, you're just real with that. You can be real with that. You can't do anything to change the past, but you can be real with what you wanted to do, even if you didn't do it. You see? And then there's just, then the truth is there. But you see, that's how you actually liberate. Is you're willing to face the pain of maybe, I wish I would have done that. I didn't, but that's the way it is. Cool.
I
Okay.
was just wanting to ask something to Marta, because I think why you raised the question is because of something that came up in our small group on the veranda about shame. And you told a bit about your story being on stage a lot and then feeling a lot of shame afterwards. So I think in this situation there's not really something that you actually did, but still you experience shame.
Yes.
So I have the feeling your question is coming from.
Yes, and when Cynthia talked about because I feel shame or guilty for small things, and I could apologize, and then the ego knocks again and say, but 2 days ago you also did this,
Right.
and I can't be apologized every moment. So it's painful, but the answer that I find it's just to handle that. Okay.
Well, but what you have to be really careful about is if somebody feels shame, this is the thing where you can see if the attachment is very strong to being somebody. Okay, so let's say that you actually do apologize and the person completely receives it. You can still hold on to an identity of being bad. Okay? So you also have to watch for that. So it's any identity. Because if you do something wrong and you apologize, you see, you're still bad. Because you did it in the
It's
first
like
place.
I don't want to give up that idea that I'm a bad person.
Right.
Right.
Because, see, if you don't give up the idea I'm a bad person, then you still have something to get over. You're still distracted with trying to not be a bad person instead of just being who you are right here, right now. So the best possible response, let's say that you have been a really bad person, okay? Let's just say anybody's been a really bad person. See, the best response anybody can do is to drop that identity and allow themselves to be naturally happy. And it almost seems really strange that that's possible. There was a moment in my life that I recognized that I did some stuff, and I was just horrified. And I was just like, oh my God, I did that. And at the same time, what was arising in me was liberation by facing it. And then the next thing was, well, how can I feel liberated? How can I be happy when I'm looking at all the stuff that I just did? that I've done. And it almost seemed wrong. It almost seemed like, no, that can't be the way it is. But that is the way it is, because when you face the truth will set you free. But in that moment, if you go back and you want to make yourself bad again, you see you're back in the loop of ego. So the beauty of it kind of gives me goosebumps, because the beauty of it, you just look and you go, oh my God, this system is so incredibly, this liberation process is so incredibly beautiful and soft and giving, but also there's a demand in it, because it's even saying, look, you can do the worst things on the world, but if you face the truth, you can be liberated, you can be happy. And you think, wow. You see, nobody is stuck then. Nobody is stuck. So if anybody, has done anything really, really horrible, recognize the best thing you can do is to fully face the truth and receive the love. Because if you block the love in that moment, you see you're right back into being in the bucket and inviting other people to be in there with you, which is the same thing you did when you did all your horrible things. So do you have the courage to be happy?
So, to be the courage to be happy, it's a way also to apologize and to spread that energy that for the others.
Yeah, you can look at it, you could say it's a way to apologize, but then you don't want to have this feeling of, I always have to be apologizing. It's just a way of letting go of everything, transcending the egoic habits within yourself, and in that you're giving. You're only giving, and there's nothing to apologize for. Because everything is here and now. Anything that's happened in the past that you need to apologize for, it's finished. All you can do is what you can do now. And if you allow yourself to be your true self and be happy, see, that's all you can do in any given moment. I don't want to take too many questions because we're going to go into groups. Was it important, or?
Well, I just wanted to say that you can change the guilt or the shame by consciousness. Consciousness of, okay, I won't do it again. I recognize my fault, I recognize what I did. I take the guilt, but I am going to do it better from now on.
No, but that's not going to be enough, because you're going to do it again anyway. As long as the image is still in place, as long as the attachment to the separate I is still intact, you will do it again, with all your best intentions. So you want to take it a step deeper, because you need to transcend the separate self to really not do it again.
And it's also dropping the idea that there's anything to be done. By just relaxing into being, then there will be the appropriate response. But I don't have to think, I will have to do this in order to get rid of it. Because otherwise I'm still there doing it.
But you're not
getting
really
something
relaxing
from it.
only into being. You have to be careful with that, because I understand why you're saying it. But you're relaxing into yourself as consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in the yellow zone, that means action.
Yes.
Okay, so you're not relaxing only into
Yeah.
being.
Yeah.
Because that's what sometimes people do, right? So it's not to escape into being. It's always just to be yourself. And sometimes that means action. That sometimes
Yeah,
it means
yeah.
response.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that action is to another person. Sometimes it's to yourself. You just go, oh, what's the most loving thing right now that can happen? What's the cleanest? I like to use that word clean. What's the cleanest thing? The cleanest thing is for me to take responsibility for my actions and to move on and to understand. Because everything that we do, we can learn a lot from. Okay? But we have to let go of these self-images. Otherwise it's going to be the ego putting on a spiritual face, doing all the things that it thinks it's supposed to be doing. And it's still the ego. It's still the separate I that's in charge.
And sometimes the ego puts guilt when there's no guilt to have.
Right. That's another thing, because if you're identified with being a guilty person or a bad person, you're going to do good stuff and you're still going to think it's bad. Right? I mean, this is why it's so interesting to see it from all different angles, so I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, so we're going to go into groups and stuff. I just want to, okay, so I just want you to understand some things. So, oh, sorry, we missed the middle circle. So, before we move on, so this is kind of, Pete has it in his book, it's basically like a whirlpool spinning down into itself that's convinced.
It's
that,
outside, the text is outside.
okay, but convinced that you're separate from the ocean. And usually at the core of that whirlpool, the core of ego, is fear, desire, and separation. You know, instead of desire, sometimes I like the word of need. Okay? But, you know, so just recognize that fear, it comes up. What's usually the thing that stops you from moving, from transcending egoic habits? It's usually fear. Or the need to be somebody. And then you maintain that separation so you don't have to face the fear and you don't have to face your own disillusionment. Okay? So at the break, you might want to read what Pete put up there. Okay, so you start to recognize all these different habits of ego. And you
Can we go through pride and lust? We didn't.
I
see
think we
those
did
ones.
pride.
Rage.
And what?
Rage.
Oh, rage.
Rage and lust.
Sorry. Okay. You notice we don't have anger up there. Okay, sometimes somebody will get angry about something. There can be actually a righteous anger. Okay, but when it turns into kind of rage, so a righteous anger would be something like, you know, somebody killed your dog. Let's say something as simple as that. Somebody killed your dog.
It's not simple.
No, not at all.
Well, no, but it is a simple example. 'Cause, I mean, but if you look at it, look at how it hits you. It's simple, but it's like, somebody killed my dog. Because I know if somebody killed Sam, I would, you know, I would be very angry about that. But what am I going to do with that anger? Okay, so maybe that anger, I would go to the person and I would basically just tell them how much this dog meant to me and what your action actually did and how you've not only hurt me, but you've actually hurt yourself by doing this. And maybe I say it with a lot of intensity. Okay? But if I go into rage, that's when I go into ego. Because you start, you know, I go to the person who killed my dog, and I just start screaming at them, and I just start telling them how bad they are. And I take a very strong position of their evil. You see, that's ego. You just have to recognize that's ego. People do horrible things, but a lot of times people do horrible things to animals or to each other. Or most of the time doing horrible things to animals and to each other is because you're in an egoic position. If you maintain separation, it gives you a lot of freedom to do whatever you want to whoever you want, because you don't have any conscience, because you don't look at that other. You look at that other as being another. And then it's okay to do whatever you want. So if you start to rest more deeply as yourself that's not separate, you'll start to feel more. But how you respond may be very different than if you're in an egoic position, you feel like somebody's done something to you. Does that make sense, the difference between anger and rage?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, lust. Just because you have a lustful thought does not mean that you're in ego. What a relief, right? Okay, you got to realize that, you know, the whole sexual drive is a very interesting topic in itself. But a lot of the sexual drive is just a biological urge. And then that biological urge is what's the word I want? I want to make up a word. Okay, so I'm just going to make up the word. Okay. So that biological urge is lustified. Do you see what I mean? And if you look at all the advertising, you look at all the movies and stuff, you know, they're basically making the sexual drive into all sorts of stuff. You know, making it into the most important way that you can be intimate with someone. You know, like the only way you can be truly intimate is if you're having sex or making love. Is that really true? I mean, don't you guys all feel very close and intimate with each other? And nobody is having sex. You see? So that demystifies that one. But, you know, it's just like, if you look at all the images that we're bombarded with, you know, it's just feeding that lustful kind of need. So you have a biological impulse, you know what it is. But if you start lusting, you see there's something egoic about it, because it's just like objectifying other people to, you know, to fulfill your sexual fantasies or your biological urge or whatever. But it's got, like that word lust, if you think about it, it just has something that's very... That's all I can say. You get it, right? Because don't you feel like that when you think of lust? And then if you have a lustful thought and you personalize that lustful thought, then you're like, God, I hope nobody knows I did that. Because then you think I'm... Right? So lust is very egoic. The biological, the attraction to another person, that's not egoic. You might just be attracted to them. But if you objectify them and you're using them to fulfill some kind of lustful sexual fantasy, then that's ego. Okay, there's a natural attraction that we have. We're not attracted to everybody, are we? But one thing you might notice that's very interesting is when people start manifesting their true self, you might actually be very attracted to them. It doesn't have to be sexual, but it might even feel sexual. You might see a man or a woman that is totally not your type, and you thought, oh, I'd never be attracted to them. But all of a sudden you find yourself very attracted to them. So what are we actually attracted to? That's what you got to start looking at. Am I attracted to just another physical form? You know, maybe. You know, because we're kind of trained to think this type is the right type. This woman is supposed to look like this, and then she's the one I'm supposed to be attracted to. And then all of a sudden, let's just say that there's a woman that's very fat and unattractive and all the things that you're not supposed to be as a woman, right? But the light of consciousness is just coming through her. And all of a sudden, you find yourself attracted. And you go, what is that all about? That's very interesting.
And the other way around as well. You find a very beautiful woman, you go out with her, and that's definitely not the woman that you want to be with.
Right. Because there's the light of consciousness isn't there. I had this experience once because I was in a community, and what we noticed a lot of the time is when someone really broke through something and they just started to be themselves, all of a sudden everybody was attracted to this person. And then a few days later they shut down again, and all of a sudden nobody was attracted to that person. So what's really going on? Okay, so we already talked about pride, so I think we covered everything. And you guys can talk about this more in your groups too. Okay, so I just want to go over something, just how a thought can create some of these things on the chart, okay? So let's say you have a thought that everyone is doing it better than I am, okay? Inferior. Then all of a sudden you're going to feel inferior, right? If you personalize that thought. Another thought, I don't have anything interesting to say. Again, a limiting thought telling you that you are less than you are, inferior, again. Nobody understands me.
Victimization.
Superior.
Yeah? Superior, victimization. I have a special problem. I'm worse than everyone else. superior in your inferiority. Isn't that interesting? We can be so superior about how shit we are. Okay. It's all those other people that are making you unhappy. Victimization. As soon as I know everything, then I can relax.
Right.
No, need.
Greedy.
Greed, needy, the need to know, right? Everything is out of control. Everything is out of control.
The need to be in control.
Right. The need to be in control, or the illusion that there is control. So it's just an idea, it's just a thought. Okay, don't forget, you have to personalize these thoughts, and then these things will happen. I don't want to be seen. Pride.
Shame, I would say.
Shame. Unworthiness. Again, inferiority. But again, you always got to look, because when somebody's inferior, they're actually always being superior. But you know, you won't recognize, if you're a person that tends to identify with being weak, you see it doesn't feel superior, does it? It feels very inferior. I'm so weak. But you're very proud of your weakness. Right? Okay. He or she doesn't love me. I am all alone and nobody cares about me. A victim. But it's also, we skipped this one, it's also affirmation. I need affirmation in order to tell me that I'm okay. I'm doing it wrong. You can expand off of the chart, just because there's only a few. I'm doing it wrong. And people mention this. Isn't that the need to be perfect?
Yeah.
Okay, and then after, when you have that need to be perfect and you think you've done something wrong, then you feel ashamed and embarrassed. Okay, I am afraid to stand out.
Shame.
Pride.
But it's also limitation. Because if you're afraid to stand out, who is the I that's afraid to stand out? It's basically saying, I'm not good enough to actually stand out. Okay, it's not possible for me to create, explore, express my true passions or be happy.
Total separation.
Cynicism. Cynicism. It's the nasty voice of cynicism. It's not possible for you or anybody else. Can you see that just destroys anything? It's just not possible. So it's the ultimate victim. They don't know what they're talking about. And the need to be right? Now, the thing I didn't say, I want to put in, when you have a very strong self-image of thinking that you already know everything, let me change that. If you have a very strong image of anything, you see, the way this works is you have a very strong image, and any data coming from any place else that's contrary to your self-image, whether it be inferior, superior, it doesn't matter. Any data that's coming in that's contrary to your self-image will just bounce off. So you have to be very interested in order to look and receive the data that's coming in. It doesn't mean you have to believe it.
What is data?
Information. So if there's information coming in and you react really quick and you don't leave any space, then your self-image is intact. So you don't have to believe other people, but you have to be able to listen and receive the information. But if you have a very strong image, it's not going to make any sense to you. It's just going to boing. So the way you can look at this, if you have an underlying belief that you're bad, and someone gives you a compliment, says, wow, you did that really well. Ba-boing. You don't receive it. What do you usually say? Oh, no, it wasn't that great. I could have done it really better. But can you just receive it and say thank you? Okay. Okay, now these are just a couple of things that I just want you to look at to just show how we relate to ourselves, usually from a very weird idea of who we are, like a separate self. We have all sorts of weird ways that we relate to something. So, have you ever had the thought that says, I am lost in my mind? So, how is that possible? To like fold up your body and you stick it up in your head and you can't find your way out? I mean, but you think about it, right? It's like, oh, I'm lost in my mind. So you should think about these things when you say them.
That's an idiom? That's an idiom?
I'm lost in the mind?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's more of actually we believe that to be true. We actually believe, I mean, if we say there's an idiom called it's raining cats and dogs, you know, when it's raining really hard, this is an American idiom, it's raining cats and dogs. So obviously you know cats and dogs are not falling out of the sky. But I am lost in my mind. We actually believe that who I am is lost in my mind. You see, that's why it's different than an idiom, kind of. Just think about it. Okay. Same kind of thing. I am stuck in my mind. Or no, excuse me, I am stuck in my head. Again, I'm stuck in my head. I mean, if you kind of visualize what you would have to do to be stuck in your head, I mean, how do you do that? Okay, how about this one? My thoughts are driving me crazy.
That's pretty common.
That's very common, right? So what's actually going on there? Who is the I that you're identifying with in that moment? And how are those thoughts actually driving you crazy? Because don't forget, you don't know what a thought is. When I asked you yesterday, what is a thought? So you've got something that you don't know what it is, but you know it's driving you crazy, whoever that I is. Okay? Pete said this one the other day. I think to myself. Have you ever had a conversation in your head?
Oh,
One?
Did you ever wonder who's talking to who in there? You know, it's like, oh, I'm having a conversation in my head.
it's
You
pretty
know?
interesting.
Yeah, even worse. It's very interesting. Or you're trying to plan, you know, because you're going to talk to somebody, so you go through the whole conversation of how it's going to go in your head, right? Okay, so who's talking to who? Okay, now people say this all the time. This part of myself is afraid of something. This part of myself is like this part of myself is like that. So when you do that, just sit there and go, who's in there? It must be pretty crowded. Okay, so I just wanted to mention those few things because you can see that we have to start really getting interested in what our experience is and how we're relating to our experience. Okay, and it can be really funny, but you know, when it's funny, just start to go, wow, look at that, I'm very attached to an idea that actually makes no sense at all. And usually if you have an idea like this, it's usually from a place of there's a problem too. Okay? Okay, so we're going to go into groups, and so we're going to, we have some questions here. I almost forgot what the questions were. Okay, so the first question is going to be what is real care? Okay, what is real care? Okay. Now, these next questions, they kind of all go together. What is your relationship to your life now that you know it is based on a bunch of conditioned thoughts? Okay, because basically all those conditioned thoughts become a belief, an idea, a self-image, and that self-image we call my life. All that activity we call my life, right? So now that you can kind of see it more clearly, What's your relationship to your life? When you think about your life now, does the idea make sense? So that goes into the next question. So you don't have to really answer these questions specifically. You can kind of talk about it. Do you really have a life separate from consciousness or God?
Do you?
Do you really have a life separate from consciousness or God?
Or another way to say it is, do you have a personal life?
Yeah, you could say that. Okay, this last question I don't like, so we're not going to do it. Okay, so I think you get the point. It'll just stimulate some conversation, but you really want to look, because now, we're on day 8, so pretty soon you're going to go back to your life. So I want you to start thinking about what you think your life is, and is there really anything to go back to? Even now, is your life actually here in the same way it was before? So that's what those questions are kind of about.